In this video, we would like to inform you about the creation and content of the new draft standard that relates to business to consumer information on the environmental impacts of construction products and building elements. The drafting of this standard is part of the assignment from the European Commission, given to CEN in Mandate M350. The intended users of the standard are professional organizations, providing environmental information from business to consumers. For this, they can set up and use their own benchmark system. The organizations must meet the requirements and tasks assigned to a program operator according to the ISO 14025. A program operator has many duties to fulfill and is intended to ensure transparency and credibility in the declarations, and is also responsible for making sure that its documentation fulfills the requirements and the standards. The standard provides horizontal rules for business to consumer communication, including benchmarking systems. Environmental product declarations according to the European Standard EN 15804 are used to provide easy-to-understand information to consumers, to make informed comparisons on the environmental impacts of construction products or elements. The standard makes as few as possible new rules, but makes optimum use of existing and used European and ISO standards regarding the making of EPDs, weighting of results, benchmarking, classification and communication. B2C communication and benchmarking methodology described in the standard is based on a functional unit and cradle-to-grave assessments. Construction products and elements can be compared, according to the contribution they make to the environmental performance of the building. This is only possible as they are functionally equivalent, and the conditions given in paragraph 5.3 of EN 15804 are respected. In case these conditions are not fulfilled, B2C communication is possible, but it should not include any benchmarking or comparative assertion. The standard gives two main options of business to consumer communication. 1. B2C communication without benchmarking. 2. B2C communication based on a benchmarking system. With option 1, there are no benchmarks or performance classes. Definition of reference units with the same functional equivalence is not necessary. Also, normalization, weighting and scores are not necessary, but are optional. With option 1, you must use all the core environmental impact indicators of EN 15804. Optional is the use of the additional environmental indicators and the indicators describing resource use, waste categories, output flows and carbon content at the factory gate. Option 2. Benchmarking, gives three different options for approach. Option 2.1, a single score method, using all the environmental impact indicators of EN 15804. That are the core and additional indicators. This is the recommended approach. Option 2.2, single score method, using only the core impact indicators of EN 15804. This is the basic approach. All three approaches for benchmarking have to use the normalization and weighting method according to the PEF guidance rules. Option 2.3 is called the alternative approach, an approach deviating from the recommended and the basic approach. But it must fulfill all the other rules defined in the standard. With the alternative approach, a selection of the additional impact indicators is allowed. The benchmark systems must all meet the following conditions. Use of the full life cycle. That means modules A1 to C4, from raw material supply up to and including the disposal phase. Separate the results for module D. This is information on the benefits and loads beyond the system boundary. B2C communication and benchmarking systems require the use of product groups to classify the construction products, assembled systems or construction elements. The product groups shall be clearly defined using a new or an existing classification system. Benchmarking systems require the development of functional equivalents to allow the comparison. The functional equivalent is used as a reference unit, where the functional requirements and technical requirements of a part of the building are quantified. It is important that the use scenarios correspond to the practice where the construction product is used. Information available in modules A1 to A3 is independent from scenarios, so its representativeness is implicit. But scenarios for other life cycle stages, declared in EPD, should be considered carefully, for example the scenarios for transport, installation and end of life. Information from the EPD according to EN 15804 shall be used by default. In case that scenarios are not representative, the modules related to these scenarios shall be recalculated with the right scenarios, following the rules of EN 15804. For benchmarking systems, aggregation of modules A1 to C4 is required, for each environmental indicator, for the representative scenarios. Results for Module D shall be separated from the result for A1 to C4. The score is obtained from the aggregation of the normalized and weighted values from the previous stages. In practice, two scores are calculated. Modules A1 to C4 score, for all the relevant indicators. Module D score, also for all the relevant indicators. Depending on the aim of the benchmarking, different approaches may be used to define a benchmark. The benchmark shall be consistent with the rules defined in the standard. The recommended approach to calculate a benchmark is a single score calculated according to the PEF guidance. But alternative approaches are allowed. The rules for the definition of benchmark shall be consistent across product groups, follow equivalent criteria and serve for the purpose of comparison in a consumer context. Performance classes facilitate the comparison between the benchmark and the score of the product assessed. Considering that the benchmark is calculated for the module A1 to C4 score, module D score shall also use the same performance classes developed for the module A1 to C4 score. But both scores shall be reported together. The performance classes can be defined based on different approaches as described in the standard. The communication shall be based on a study which has been undertaken in accordance with the standard, and following the minimum requirements of ISO 14026, for business to consumers communication. Communication shall include supporting information and explanatory statement, which enable all interested parties to access information on where the communication content originated. Depending on the aim of communication, and the relevance for the consumers, different forms of communication may be adopted, as shown in the standard. And last but not least, the development of the business to consumer communication, or benchmarking system, shall be fully transparent. The standard states the information that shall be available. Thank you for your attention. And we hope that the introduction of the standard has been helpful.